he tends to focus on movies
that are about
about
men.
very powerful, very eccentric, and very self-centered men.
Yeah.
Right. Powerful is, it depends, because
Right.
I don't think like Adam Sandler's character in Punch
Yeah, I
Drunk
was
Love is
just gonna say
powerful,
that.
but certainly um powerful in the sense that they have a huge uh effect around them.
I
They
think that it's a lot of it is about male emotion, really, about the intensity of male emotion.
I feel as if I've been looking for you for a very long time.
You found me. Whatever you do it carefully.
Hey everybody, I'm here with AK Kennedy because she recently got married, right? So formerly known as AK Jackson. She was with us on the Mother video we did in the car on our way back from the theater.
Yeah.
And we're here to talk about P.T. Anderson's Phantom Thread. The core of it is this really dark and disturbing and abusive.
It's a mutually abusive dynamic.
It's mutually abusive, although I think it's much more on his part than hers.
Absolutely.
But it's to put it lightly, it's an unhealthy relationship between Reynolds Woodcock. What an unfortunate last name, Woodcock.
The House of Woodcock.
The House of Woodcock. Man, it just sounds like an old school porno studio, you know.
And Alma.
And Alma. Let's talk about some of the themes that this movie has. And I think probably the most prominent for me anyway is the themes of death and living a half-life.
Yeah. I felt like on a certain level, the implication was supposed to be that he was living this half-life, that he felt cursed.
My brother can feel cursed, that love is doomed for him.
He felt like, he talks early on about how there's all this superstition about the wedding dresses, right?
Yeah.
And that he and his sister sewed their mother's second wedding dress, and that they weren't really supposed to do that. To curse that you're never going to get married, that you're never going to be happy in love. And he sees himself as being a cursed person. He sees himself as not really fully being alive. And I think that definitely ties into this thing with the mushrooms, because, you know, when he's dying, two things are happening. One is it's a very intense experience, and experiencing trauma makes you feel real alive in that moment.
Yeah.
And the other thing is it proves to him that he's not dead, right?
It makes him feel more alive.
And after it's done, he feels like he survived something and that he's back. I feel this way when I just have a regular cold, right? Like I've been lying in bed for 5 days, and then I get up and I'm like, man, I'm back among the living.
No, totally. Yeah.
And I think that he's getting that's a big part of it for him. That experience, he comes out of it loving and kind towards Alma and appreciative. He wants to get married. As soon as he realizes he didn't die, he wants to get married. Yeah. Right? And death and marriage are very tied together in this movie because of that idea of the curses and the dresses and all this stuff. Yeah. The movie has a lot to do with marriage also.
What do you think the significance is of like him seeing his mother, like when he in that, I guess, how they say near death, but to him it was near death.
It felt to him like it was a near death experience. He certainly believed that it was a near death experience.
Yes.
And so he has this hallucination of his mother. And I think that he's got a very deep, or he perceives himself as having a very deep connection to his mother. Early on in the movie, before we even meet Alma, he says to Cyril, to his sister, I felt her presence recently. Like, no one is ever truly dead. Nobody's ever truly gone. And so I feel that maybe that's sort of a self-comforting apparition of her.
And he keeps something of hers.
He has a picture of her printed out and sewn in the breast pocket of his jacket, that leads into the next thing I want to talk about. But he says to Alma early on, he says, do you have a photograph of your mother? And she says, not with me. And he says, you should always carry your mother with you. And his mother is the one who taught him how to sew, taught him his trade. Yeah. He feels very indebted to her. Yeah. but we never know anything about her besides that. We only know her in this vague, reverential memory that he has towards her. And I think his sister doesn't share that. She never says that she doesn't, but I don't think that her experience with her mother was the same.
Well, she's kind of a cipher, honestly. I don't really know what's going on with her, and but you know,
I think that she exists on one level to sort of prove to us that she acts very similarly to him, right? She's less extra than he is,
Yeah.
but it's a very academic word there.
no, yeah, absolutely.
But at the same time, I think that she sort of exists in this movie in order to show that this is the product of the way they were raised. Their behavior, it's nurtured behavior, right? That they're both talented at this thing. They both work together at it, but they also both are very particular. At the same time, I do think there is some commentary, or there has to be some commentary about the way that expectations for a man and a woman's behavior are different, right? That there is siblings, they were raised the same, pretty much, obviously, with the differences of gender, yet she can get her shit together, and he can't.
See, the thing, what's happening in the movie is that he is someone who, because he can't regulate himself, he was never taught to regulate himself. I mean, he was, he's a man in the 1950s.
Yeah, men were not, and
Men-
still really aren't taught how to
But
regulate themselves.
what that kind of means in terms of his behavior is that he is extra. He's out, right?
Yeah.
He's doing all this stuff, and it spills out and affects other people. And because all the other people around him are women, and they have also, you presume, had a very normative upbringing. They're raised to absorb it.
Yeah.
And you see that it's very clear cut in his relationship with Cyril,
Yeah.
because his eccentricities dictate and dominate the life patterns of everyone in that house.
Right.
Because he doesn't like loud sounds, then no one else makes loud sounds.
Yeah.
Because he wants X, Y, and Z, well, everyone does X, Y, and Z.
Well, yeah, immediately.
And everyone has to accommodate his needs, his desires, and all that. But there's a line he cannot cross.
Cyril keeps him in a certain zone.
In addition to people having to accommodate him, there's a limit to how far they can go. Like in other words, his masculinity isn't all that much different from like a child, right?
Right.
A child who's trying to figure out their boundaries.
Yeah.
They act up
Yeah.
to find
He's
out how
kicking
far
at
they can
fences.
go.
He's kicking at
exactly.
fences.
So, and she gives him a boundary, and when
Well,
she does,
yeah.
she's very, very
She's
firm
very
about
clear
it,
about it.
and he backs down.
Yeah.
No, don't turn it on me. I don't want your cloud on my head.
shut up,
Oh, no,
Cyril.
you can shut right up. Don't pick a fight with me. You certainly won't come out alive. I'll go right through you, and it'll be you who ends up on the floor. Understood?
The role of Cyril, the role of women in his life, who are more or less on equal footing with him, is to provide those boundaries for him.
Yeah.
Is to keep him in check because
Right,
he
because
lacks
he
the ability
doesn't
to
have
do
the
it for
ability to do
himself.
it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would imagine that she's done this her entire life. That
Yeah, you
her,
have to. I
her
mean, they're-
responsibility as a sister is to sort of clean up his emotional messes. That she has to be more emotionally mature than him in order to protect him.
Yeah,
from
and
himself.
also to protect herself.
Yeah.
too. That she had to learn, I would imagine, at an early age to deal with him.
Yeah.
To suffer him. How did we get here? Why were we talking about?
We're talking about
Cyril?
death. We're talking about the mother.
Okay, the
We're
mother.
talking
That's
about
right.
their
The
mother.
mother.
And I think that I just got the impression that Cyril had a less warm reverence towards the mother than Reynolds did.
Well, because you would imagine the mother allowed him
and
or-
babied him and coddled him and comforted him and gave him a space
right.
to be this way. And that's not that is a big distinction between men and women in the world today and during that time, that men just got to do the things they wanted to do and women had to be practical. Like men could have artistic pursuits or man hobbies, go fishing or whatever it is, and the women would stay home and cook and clean for them. And that's the exact opposite of how we talk about men and women. We talk about women as being frivolous and men as being practical.
That's a good point. Yeah. That. Yeah.
Every person in the movie, except for him, is very practical.
if a woman had the exact same eccentricities,
She would never go anywhere in the world.
right, people would be just too put off by it.
Yeah.
Then and now. I mean,
Yeah.
I think still we still live in a world where if a woman were to act as much of an ass as Reynolds Woodcock, there wouldn't be any kind of kindness in the perception of her.
Yeah.
She'd be just a raging bitch as far as everyone else is concerned.
Why doesn't Cyril do designs? You know, I'm sure she could.
Yeah.
You know, she was making clothes in the same age that he was. She worked on the mother's wedding dress too. They designed it together.
Yeah.
They used to work together when they were children.
Yep.
You know, it's a movie about clothes on a certain level.
Yeah.
That's what, you know, like I went and watched it on a 70 millimeter projection and I got this like promotional book about it, right? Which
How was the 70 mil, by the way? I didn't get a chance to see it.
it was beautiful. It was absolutely gorgeous. Like, I love the fact this movie is done on film and I love watching a film print. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, it feels so indulgent. And
Yeah, it does. It does. It feels like a luxury these
does,
days, right?
yeah.
Because everything's digital now and
Yeah.
everything's and that all looks great too. But there's with a movie that has such a clear love of film,
Yeah.
of like I don't mean like film as an art medium, but as a literal physical medium. There's so much grain in that image.
yeah.
And it's, yeah,
And
I'm jealous that you got to see that 70 millimeter. I
it
really
was
am.
beautiful to watch. And I honestly think that like the movie's definitely improved by watching it in that projection.
Mhm.
There's such perfect craft in this movie.
Oh yeah.
You know,
He's really good he's really good at making movies. He really
Yeah.
is. I mean, like
Yeah.
it's
like there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot to debate about, talk about,
Yeah.
to be frustrated with. But when you're just talking out the image, like it's such a watchable experience in that department.
P.T. Anderson's filmmaking feels like a dying breed.
Yeah.
So I think it's always a treasure to be able to watch something, to have the privilege of living in a city where 70 millimeter prints of a movie about a man making dresses is a thing you can indulge in.
Yeah. But going back to the clothes,
Yeah.
we started talking about the clothes and we sidetracked ourselves. I think that the whole theme that we get presented with the idea that he hides secrets in the clothes, right?
Right.
I found this to be like a little too easy to unpack. Like he's a man, he's a British man during that time period, and he doesn't know how to express his emotions.
Historically reticent to talk about their emotions,
Yeah.
British people, and especially back then. I mean, it's a stereotype, but it's
But I mean,
kind of true.
speaking from my life experience,
It's kind of
being
true.
married to one of
There's
them,
definitely a thing about British
it's definitely
men
there.
in particular who struggle with being forthcoming about how they're feeling.
And it's just the way they're culturally raised.
Yeah.
And especially during that time.
The so-called stiff upper
Stiff
lip.
upper lip, yeah. Keep it to yourself.
Right.
Keep it buried down. And where he keeps it, where he buries it is in his work. Where he literally buries these things is inside the clothes.
Yeah.
You know, he loves his mother, so he has her inside his coat pocket, not somewhere where you can see it.
Right.
Right?
Or yeah.
Not somewhere where someone else can see it.
Yeah.
It's inside him. And
Yeah.
that's really like, it's so.
Where it belongs.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
where everyone should keep it. Like it tells Alma,
Yeah.
you should always carry her with her. In a way, he's saying, keep it to yourself.
Keep
Keep
it
it
to
all
yourself,
in
yeah.
there. Internalize your emotions.
yeah. And then the part where he makes the wedding dress for the princess and he sews "Never Cursed" into it, right? And Alma finds it when they're repairing the dress. And like there's a lot to ask, like who's not cursed here?
Right.
Is it him? Is he trying to get rid of his own feeling of being cursed? Is it a message towards all the women who are working on the dress? Is it sort of like meant to be a kindness towards them? And in which case, why
Right.
is his only kindness that we ever really see him do?
Why is it in secret? Yeah.
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 Where did he learn this behavior in society? That's where he learned it. Is that like, you know, and I think it's really sad. And I do think there's commentary here that he's so hesitant to express kindness and to express love, right? The love that he has of his mother that he has suppressed in his clothes. You know, he puts something about Alma's name in one of her dresses,
Right.
which is meant to be a love symbol. And then this sort of sweet message about not being cursed in the dress.
Yeah.
But he's so readily able to show his anger and his frustration and his
Yeah.
his male emotions.
Yes, that's yeah, and that's a sad thing when you think about it. Is that the only emotion he's conditioned to think as being appropriate to express and to express often and intensely is rage.
Yeah. Rage and dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
No, Alma, what are you doing?
There's tea for you.
Don't put the tray on the table, please. Just take it off. I didn't ask for tea.
No, but
You take it out, please.
yes, I can take it out.
It's a bit late now, isn't it?
I'm taking it out.
Yeah, but it's a bit late now, isn't it?
But I'm taking it out.
The tea is going out. The interruption is staying right here with me.
Maybe on a certain level, it's good for him to get sick because he can feel vulnerable and he can feel an escape from that toxic masculinity. Because his sickness is also very secret. He won't even let a doctor
Right.
examine him.
Yeah.
Which is all that part.
That
I was
weakness.
just like,
yeah.
I was just like, oh my god, British men, go see a doctor.
Yeah.
I'm making this a little bit too personal here.
Is there something you want to say about your husband not going to the doctor? Is that what you're suggesting?
Is there? But and he's not the only one. Everybody I know in that community. Oh my god, I have to stop.
Uh-huh.
This is no longer relevant. But you know, he doesn't want to be seen in his weakness. It's not that he doesn't want help. It's not that he doesn't want care. He doesn't want to be examined because it's so important to him to keep his vulnerabilities a secret.
It's a very good choice of word. Not wanting to be examined, not having his. I should finish that thought. Not having his emotional or physical weaknesses examined by outsiders. But also, there's an interesting connection there, isn't there, with correlating or associating physical illness with weak emotions
Yeah.
as both being shameful things.
Yes.
Or maybe they're not that different from each other.
Yeah.
That they're both seen as something that's wrong with him,
Mm-hmm.
right? In his mind, that these are failings. They're maybe having soft or weak emotions is in of itself a form of illness. You know?
Yeah.
There's a strange little connection there, but I think it's really more articulating what's wrong with him.
With him instead of being
It's
societal.
not particularly interested in how he got to be that way.
It's not meant to be a societal thing. It's not meant to be about him, but it really
Right.
can easily be extrapolated to be
Absolutely.
a societal thing.
Absolutely.
Food. Unless you want to say something else about clothes.
Well, I want to talk about. I do want to talk about food, but I want to talk about the Phantom Thread.
Okay.
Right. The title Phantom Thread,
Yeah.
connecting the act of making clothes with the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he's sewing these secrets in there. What can we extrapolate from that? What can we?
Well, there's a really important moment for this theme early in the movie where they're having dinner at their regular place and a young woman comes up to him and says, I want to be buried in one of your dresses. Right?
Yeah. I forgot about that moment. Good catch. Yeah.
That, you know, her expression of her admiration for him is about wanting to take it into the afterlife, you know? And when we see his apparition of his mother, she's wearing the wedding dress that he sewed for her.
She's exactly the same as she was in the photograph we saw of her.
Yeah. Which we have to assume is the picture that he has in his coat. So we see her appearing dead wearing something that he made for her.
Yeah.
You know, and this is a theme. And there's something about a desire to create something lasting, but in a way it's impossible because clothing isn't really something that lasts. The part also where they take the dress back from, I can't remember the name of her.
I don't remember her name, but yeah, I know you're talking
Mrs.
about.
Rose, I think was her name. Maybe.
I don't remember.
They go and
The drunk lady. The
yeah.
lady who got fucking shit faced and made a fucking ass of herself. Her.
Yeah. And like she can't behave this way dressed by the House of Woodcock.
Right.
Is the message that they have for her.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was exclusively or even very much about the reputation of their brand. I think it was about the dresses are meant to really be such a part of him that I think Alma, because Alma's the one who encourages him to be upset about this, right? That I think that it's about disrespecting something that is a part of him. And that these dresses are, in a way, something that they're children of his, or something that he puts into the world, right?
Well, they're sacred to him.
Yeah.
In a way,
He has a huge reverence towards them,
Yeah.
and they're nothing is ever good enough for his dresses, and no person is good enough for his dresses. The same way that nothing's ever good enough for him. And I don't know. I'm not sure really where I'm going with this thought. It's just that I feel a connection between those three moments, between the girl saying she wants to be buried in one of his dresses, between him seeing the mother in a dress that he made, and between them taking that dress away from the woman who didn't deserve it.
Yeah.
You know, what was in the lining of that dress?
Yeah. Moving on to a different motif. Food.
Food.
This is there's something about art house filmmakers and using food as a vehicle for communicating all sorts of interactions between their characters. I mean, like Wong Kar-wai
Yeah.
is famously a filmmaker about food. There's so much food in his movies.
David Lynch.
Yeah, David Lynch. Food is features very prominently. Food is a battleground in this movie.
Absolutely. And he has his particularities about his food, and they're very ridiculously particular.
Yeah.
You know, like what gets cooked in oil versus what gets cooked in butter.
Oh, the amount of butter is so specific. Yeah.
Like it's too much butter, it's not enough butter. Like food is a place where he has to have control, and it's not just for him because he has to have control over the way that Alma eats also, because she eats too loud, she eats the wrong things, you know.
Yeah. Well, he has to have absolute control over his interior space, right?
Yeah.
So whatever comes in, right, it has to be exact to his specifications.
Yeah. And you know that the scene where Alma makes him dinner and she's prepared things not in the way that he likes. And it was not a mistake. You know,
Right.
she did that on purpose to demonstrate to him how extra he is.
Well, I think
on
it
a
was
certain
also
level. And it was an act of aggression.
Yeah, it was an act. Yeah, exactly. It was an act of aggression. It was because again, there's always conflict with food, right? The very first scene I think we see related to food is when his ex,
Oh, right.
his ex leaves.
Yeah.
She's leaving during breakfast.
Yeah.
which is like his sanctum of
Right.
the morning, right? No one makes a fucking sound. No one chews loud. Don't scrape your fucking butter. This is my time
Yeah.
to be alone in my brain. And that's when she's like, "Are we over? Are we done?" Food is a battleground. And then it happens again when Alma takes his order. He turns it into a challenge,
Yeah.
into a
Power play.
exactly. I can't think of any scene in the movie where people are eating food and it's not also a moment where people
Well, 'cause
are
there's
clashing interpersonally.
There's also the dinner party that they go to where the woman introduces doubts about Alma to him.
Yeah, and this is shortly after they're married.
Yeah.
And it's a dinner party. Alma and Woodcock are sitting far apart from each other.
Yeah.
And this awful lady starts trying to like worm doubts into his ear about her fidelity.
Yeah.
So yeah, another scene, more food, more conflict.
For one thing, I found it interesting how much they talked about the butter and the oil consistently, those two things, because it's what makes food rich. And I felt like there were a lot of parts of the movie that were emotionally dry and like
Austere.
Yeah. There's a lot of dryness in the movie, lacking in that sort of emotional richness. And in a way, maybe his cravings towards this oil and this butter is, again, a subliminal desire for that. And the fact that Alma is so generous with it, right? Like she uses
Yeah.
too much butter and she's making too
Yeah.
much noise with it. And like maybe you just not butter your bread. All of these things, I think,
Yeah.
are commentaries about her and her identity. So I think it's telling that the ultimate quote unquote solution
Yeah.
that they come up with is edible.
The resolution of this theme or this motif
Yeah.
with the food is that with the food for pretty much throughout the entire movie is a battlefield of conflict, but it also ends up being where some kind of armistice
Yeah.
is achieved.
Right.
Is through food, finding some really fucked up food related solution to all their problems.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say problems,
all.
but their conflict.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's also, I mean, it's a really beautiful movie about food too. Like every time they even the scenes that are supposed to be like really abrasive, like because the sound designer really put a lot of work into making like the crunching of the toast.
The sound design in this
like,
movie is
really
like one
annoying.
of the most brilliant sound designs.
Yeah,
Period.
it's really good.
It's
Really
amazing.
good work with the sound. Part of what makes the movie so beautiful is its focus on sensory experience.
Yeah, I would agree with
That
that.
it's not just the food. It's touching the fabric. It's
Colors, textures.
yeah. You spend a lot of time lingering on the tactile elements of this world.
The tactile elements, the design elements of their home,
Yeah.
the country home, the way that the country home looks and
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
feels, you know?
Yeah. Speaking of, this is a small little detail, but you brought something up about the kitchen that I thought was hilarious.
What, the books?
The books, yeah.
All right.
You noticed this probably because you watched it on 70 millimeter. I didn't get to see the detail of this, but
Okay.
yeah.
So the housekeeper, whoever, tells Alma, like, she asks, how do you know which ones are poisonous? And she says, well, just look in the book in the kitchen. So she goes to get the book down in the kitchen, and there are 3 books in the kitchen. There's a book about mushrooms, a book about cactuses, and a book about dogs. Why? What does it
do you
mean?
remember what the book about dogs was about specifically?
It was about identifying types of dogs.
That's so funny.
And like they
It's
were
like a breeder's guide or something like that. Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
funny. What's it doing in the kitchen?
why is
Yeah.
it? Because like I would imagine that the kitchen of this house would have recipe books,
Yeah.
right? And then there'd be a mushroom book stuck in there. But maybe that's supposed to be commentary about the fact that they don't need recipe books because they just have to make everything exactly the way that Reynolds wants it.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe it's like an inside joke. Maybe someone snuck on a dog book up there for some reason.
But
I'll
also,
have to like.
why cactuses? You don't eat cactuses. Certainly in England,
Not
you do not
in
eat
England.
cactuses.
Yeah, I mean,
And I eat
in
cactuses.
Mexico, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
We live in LA, so we
yeah,
might eat
Tex-Mex
cactus.
or whatever. Yeah, but yeah.
Not in 1950s England. You
so
didn't.
funny. I'm gonna have to like get a copy of like the Blu-ray at some point just to like get that scene and see it. I'd be impressed if you got like exact number of books right too, like 3 books. But yeah, anyway, I thought that was a really funny little thing that you picked up on.
The main, like, big twist of the movie with Alma poisoning Woodcock or Reynolds,
Yeah.
and then at the end of him consenting to this and
Yeah.
agreeing to this, right? People talk about this like it's people I've talked to about this talk about this like it's a consensual power exchange dynamic, right? Like it's about her meeting his emotional needs that he needs to feel out of control sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And you know, it's her way of grabbing power in a relationship where she's powerless and where she's treated like a mannequin a lot of the time. You know, she's treated like an accessory in that home. But whether or not this works, why do it? Is my question for them. Like, what do they get out of this? And there's an important thing which is never addressed in the movie, which sort of answers that question on the subtext, but which P.T. Anderson didn't, for some reason, feel the need to talk about, which is what she gets out of it is money and not having to live in austerity. Because the thing that was probably the hardest for me about this movie is that the era that it's set in, we see all of this glamour and glitz and, you know, high fashion and drinking champagne and having a martini at every meal and wearing an ascot and all this stuff is set in England in the post-war era, which was a time when a lot of people were literally starving. You know, my husband's British and his family, like his parents during that time didn't have plumbing in their house. You know, they lived in such abject poverty because parts of England were just not rebuilt. And the class differences were enormous. So if Alma was working as a waitress in a,
It looked like
a
kind
B&B,
of like a country, bed
Is
and
it-
breakfast. Yeah.
So she's obviously living in poverty. She's living in what they would have called austerity during that time. So that's a huge power play that he has there, is that he's giving her this life with fancy dresses and big meals, and
Yeah, it's a huge step up for
it's
her.
a huge step up for her that she never would have gotten without this.
Right.
And so her impulse to stay is probably largely based off of that security.
You would imagine, but the film
But
never
the film
addresses
never
it.
addresses it ever. The film never addresses these class differences at all, which is something that's really hard for me about P.T. Anderson's work, is the fact that even though the mise en scène of all of his movies is it's treated like it's very important. It's treated like it's significant where and when these movies are set, but it's actually not.
The camera seems to really care about the environments these characters are in.
Yeah.
And yet the story
doesn't
really deal with it at all. Like
there's no reason why this movie, besides the visuals, couldn't be cut and pasted to be
in any
other era.
Yeah.
In
any other place in the world.
Any other place in the
Yeah.
world. It doesn't need to be in England in the post-war era.
No.
Because it doesn't deal with any of the surrounding issues whatsoever.
Yeah, Alma's presence in the movie, almost to me anyway, as someone who is just even like vaguely familiar with the time period and the place, just begs for some acknowledgement of the class differences between them, and where she's coming from, seeing a man like this who's living a sumptuous life, where he has the privilege to only care about clothes and how loud you chew breakfast in the morning.
There's only one moment in the movie where I feel like class is ever really addressed at all, and that's when she has her blow up at her little dinner party that she throws for him, her private dinner that she throws for him, and she starts saying like, "What is all this clothes, all this food,
Right.
And that is her saying, "This is not my world. This is not the world that I come from."
Stop playing this game.
What game? What precisely is the nature of my game?
All your rules and your clothes and all this money and everything is a game.
This was an ambush.
Stop.
Are you sent here to ruin my evening? And possibly my entire life?
Stop it!
The way that people are raised, their self-image, their cultural traditions, between somebody from the working class and somebody from that level of being the upper class, is vast.
Yeah.
And there's an undercurrent of sort of a Pygmalion story in here, with him dressing her, and the scene where she doesn't like the dress that he's picked for her, and he says patronizingly, "Oh, one day you'll develop taste."
It's not because the fabric is adored by the clients that Cyril is right. It's right because it's right. Because it's beautiful. Maybe one day you'll change your taste, Alma.
Maybe not.
Maybe you have no taste.
Maybe I like my own taste.
Yes, just enough to get you into trouble.
Perhaps I'm looking for trouble.
Stop!
And that's another thing. I think, like, probably one of the most obvious, for people who aren't really familiar with the time period, the most obvious difference in privilege, I guess, or status, I think status is probably a better word, would be the gender stuff. The fact that he's so critical of her when he first meets her. Like, he brings her in and he's just casually making all these comments about her body and, like...
Well, like their first date when they go out, he orders her food without asking her what she likes.
Yeah.
And then he takes her makeup off of her.
Right.
Right. And he does
goes,
it
like, that's better.
Yeah. He does it like this is a romantic gesture.
Yeah.
But that's so insulting. She went out of her, this is how she presented herself. This is how she chose to be to him.
Yeah.
And he immediately sees her as something that he can manipulate, that he can play with, that he can bend to his will.
Yeah. That someone who exists for him to alter.
Yeah.
To his liking.
I can only think of one scene in that entire movie where Reynolds interacts with another man. And that's when he sees a doctor.
That's right.
Every other interaction is him versus a woman.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it has to be a movie about how he treats women. That's all we see.
So if that's what's happening here, if he's consciously making a story about a man in a house full of women who exist to serve him.
Yeah.
Because it's a huge staff of women who either I think they work most of their time there.
Yeah.
Some of them even stay there.
Yeah.
the resolution of the story is that Alma cooks some poisonous mushrooms for him, and that's how she's able to gain equality.
Yeah.
The way she finds power and control over him is through the kitchen. Is that saying anything about, like, society? I don't know. It doesn't seem that way. It seems like it's really more about just who the two of them are.
Right. That's what, and it's, the movie to me is about who the two people are, and they never change throughout the course of the movie. And I argued with somebody about this recently because one of my friends was saying that he makes a huge change because he agrees to be poisoned, to put his life. The words that my friend used was that he puts his life on the line for the person he loves. And I just don't feel that, because for one thing, I have a hard time seeing character change in his actions, in what we're shown of him, leading up to that. And secondly, I feel that the reason he's agreeing to this isn't for Alma, it's for himself, because it made him feel better after he went through that.
Well, I think there's an ambiguity there, because you can't know for sure.
Yeah.
Really, what it boils down to is your opinion of him as a character. Whether or not you think the reason why he consented to eating poison was because he finally understood how much she loved him and how much she understood him and all that, or if he realized that she figured out how to keep him relevant, that by finding a solution to the regulation of his emotions that's external to himself, he can therefore continue to be at the top of his game. Because that was the problem, is
That's
that
how
he would get so worked up that he'd be unable to produce at the same level of quality he was used to, and he would kind of like self-destruct. And by having the ability to sort of, chill out by being put on a deathbed for like a day, it keeps him working at the tip top of his game. So if you think of him as somebody who's incredibly self-centered and doesn't actually love her at all, he just loves what she does for him.
Yeah.
Then I think absolutely it is an incredibly selfish act of consent for him. It's kind of a depiction in a way of that fantasy a lot of people tell themselves of, like, if you find yourself in a relationship with someone who's toxic, and you go, well, you know what, if I could find the way to help them, to cure them, to heal them, to give them, some kind of, to be the sheath to their sword, right? If you find yourself in that situation and you find some way, some trick to mitigate their awfulness, it feels like a victory for you, but really it's not giving you anything.
I think that on a certain level, the message that a woman who's in a relationship with a man who is emotionally abusive to her just has to find a way to make him settle down is dangerous.
Well,
especially,
I guess, again, it comes down to whether or not you think, like, what the perception is on the part of the filmmaker and how the audience is perceiving it. Because you can definitely say what this depiction of is toxic masculinity, right? That this man cannot regulate his emotions, needs a woman to do it, abuses her emotionally. You could interpret the movie along kind of feminist lines and say, this is a critique of that kind of man, of that kind of relationship, and the dangers of falling prey to the idea that you can cure somebody by doing things for them instead of helping them do it on their own.
But my problem is that all these trappings of romance around it, the music, the style, making this look like it's a good relationship, making it look like it's idealized in certain ways, despite it really obviously not being. The
movie kind of more or less begins with a woman who you assume he was dating, and she says something along the lines of, like, so is this over? Are you actually gonna say something and like kick me out? And then that's the last time you see her, and she leaves. And Alma is the person who didn't do that. The person who did not leave the relationship, the person who did not give up, she just found a way to cope.
Yeah. And we shouldn't praise that.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, like, it does feel, and maybe because like I personally know a lot of people who've been in these kinds of relationships, I do chafe at the style of the movie, because it does feel like the intended message is that she found a way of gaining equal footing,
Yeah.
and that this is what's going to happen from this point onward is going to be this kind of fucked up but interesting tension between two like opposing but balanced forces. I think that's the kind of how we're supposed to take it. I think that's the appeal of this movie, and I think in general the appeal of P.T. Anderson movies is putting these forces of nature against each other. That was true in
There Will Be Blood.
There Will Be Blood. That was true in The Master. And the only thing that really kind of changes is do people survive it? I just wonder if that's all it is.
Yeah. And I think that's my frustration with this movie is that there are a lot of stories here. We're telling a lot of stories about Phantom Thread here. We're telling stories about class. We're telling stories about gender. We're telling stories about power exchange. P.T.
yeah.
Anderson isn't telling these stories, really.
I get the feeling when I watch P.T. Anderson movies that I'm putting a lot more in there to get something out of it.
Yeah.
Than I would normally want. I do really struggle with trying to figure out what P.T. Anderson's messages are, or if there is
I often
any.
just get the feeling watching a P.T. Anderson movie that there isn't a message and that it exists, the whole world exists in order to create a space for these actors' performances.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people like and connect with P.T. Anderson's movies, especially a lot of people who are film people do, but a lot
Sure.
of people who are more casual film viewers who don't usually view films by auteurs really like P.T. Anderson. And I think that part of it is that they enjoy watching a performance, and that's what you get out of it. In a way, sometimes it's a little bit more like watching a play.
You're kind of watching this stripped down thing, like two people in a room fighting for control of the scene.
Yeah.
And I think he undeniably does that supremely well.
Absolutely.
I mean, regardless of how I personally feel about how he approaches these stories and characters, I find myself riveted. I don't think P.T. Anderson makes the kind of movies that you or I really gravitate towards.
Yeah, we don't really connect with
that
them.
kind of there we go. That we don't really connect with that kind of thing. I want something that has a little more commentary.
Yeah.
And
It's really important to me.
Yeah, that's really important to me too, just as a way to connect to a film or just a work of art in general. I don't necessarily think P.T. Anderson does a whole lot of that. I feel that I think you're right. That it's mostly focusing on just a very narrow, specific thing, and then if you're into it, you can really immerse yourself in just that.
And to me, the things he chooses to dial out, like social and political issues surrounding it, just make me feel like something that's very important to me is being stripped away. It makes it hard for me to
Especially
connect.
because it's not just that he strips it out, but that he chooses stories
Where it could be really important.
that really beg for it almost. Like for me, like if I was given a plot synopsis of this movie, I'd be like, ooh, there's so much I could say with this. If I was gonna be making that movie, I'd be thinking all about the kind of subtext I'd be putting into it. So when I go watch it, I'm like, you didn't do any of that? Like, why didn't you? It was like right there.
Yeah.
You could have done it. I would love to, if anyone has any insight, I'd love to hear
please.
it. And I'm sorry that I can't provide any more insight than that. And I hopefully discussing this stuff is interesting without us being like huge fans of his work. Thanks for watching, everybody. Real quickly, we never really got around to saying exactly why we thought the power dynamic between Reynolds and Alma was imbalanced at the end. Poison is the only leverage Alma has over Woodcock, so when he consents to it at the end, he's basically taking that power away from her and putting it back into his hands. In other words, he's once again entirely in control of every aspect of their relationship. Anyway, if you guys disagree, or if you have any insights to share on this film or the rest of P.T. Anderson's body of work, please let us know in the comments. And as always, be sure to like, share, and subscribe.